Justice and jurisprudence should go hand in hand. But sometimes an overly lenient approach toward lawbreakers only creates a sense of impunity and encourages them to even more despicable acts. Today we speak about a person whose inglorious actions multiplied due to flaws in the justice system. In the year 2009, Amber Dubois lived in a district of San Diego, California. She lived in Escondido together with her family. Amber's parents divorced when she was still very young, but she remained in contact with both. Later, her mother married Dave Cave, and Amber got a younger sister named Allison. Amber got along well with her stepfather and considered him a second dad. Amber was distinguished by intelligence and love of reading. She was more interested in books than in things typical for her peers. Romantic relationships did not interest her for the time being. The young woman strived for knowledge and attended additional courses to be ahead of the school program. But Amber's greatest passion was animals. She read about them, visited zoos and exhibitions. She recorded her impressions in a diary. This love developed into the dream of becoming a marine biologist and researching animal behavior. Therefore, Amber was delighted about the opportunity to participate in the school program, Farmers of the Future. The essence of the program was that students could buy a farm animal and take care of it. Amber wanted to acquire a lamb. Although the family was not wealthy, the young woman begged her parents insistently to help her with this project. The parents were not particularly enthusiastic about the idea, but gave in to their daughter's urging. They provided about $200 for the purchase of the animal. Only the question of housing remained to be solved. Amber waited impatiently for the day when she could pick up her lamb, which she had already named Lynette. On the 13th of February 2009, a Friday, Amber Dubois set off for school with a check for the lamb in her backpack. Normally, she walked and needed about 15 minutes each way. On this day, Amber did not come home on time. The first to notice this was her stepfather, who came from work around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Normally, Amber was there earlier, but he thought she might have lingered at the animal circle or already bought the lamb. Nevertheless, an uneasy feeling crept over him. The man searched the area but did not find Amber. He tried to call her, but without success. The farmer from whom the purchase of the lamb was planned said he had not seen the young woman. The stepfather informed his wife about this, who then also began calling her daughter. Dave drove to the school club, but Amber had not been seen there. At the school, he was told that she had not appeared since the morning. This news worried the man greatly, and when Amber's mother learned of it, real panic broke out. Amber would not have voluntarily missed classes. Absence from classes did not correspond to her character at all, which worried her mother greatly. Moreover, Amber was supposed to get a long-awaited lamb on this day. The relatives did not suspect what unpleasant circumstances had prevented the young woman from reaching school. The mother immediately called the police and reported the disappearance. In tears, she asked them to begin the search immediately. The woman took time off from work and hurried home to search for her daughter. She also informed Amber's biological father, who also participated in the search. The arriving law enforcement officers spoke with the parents. They reported that Amber was quiet and domestic, interested in learning and animals, and had hardly any contact with peers outside of school. The parents did not believe that she could have left on her own. There had never been problems with her. After reviewing Amber's things, the investigators also discarded the theory of a runaway. All her things and her money had remained at home. They decided to check Amber's route to school for clues, assuming that she might have met with someone, but the search remained fruitless. Classmates confirmed that Amber concentrated on learning and had little contact with others. The check of Amber's internet activities also revealed nothing suspicious, only searches about animals. In an attempt to find any information, the police turned to the public for help. Announcements with a photo of the missing person were distributed. Thanks to the active participation of citizens, the law enforcement officers received first useful information. Several eyewitnesses claimed to have seen a young woman resembling the missing person on the morning of the 13th of February. She was noticed on a path as she walked alone toward her school. Soon another witness came forward, an acquaintance of the family who often drove young Amber to school since their children learned together. On that fateful morning, she also saw Amber walking to school and wanted to offer her a ride. However, when she was at the same level as the young woman, she noticed that she was walking and talking with a boy. The woman did not recognize him, but decided not to disturb the conversation and drove past. She described the boy as dark-skinned with a round face. At this point, this was the only clue for the investigators. They picked up this information and tried to determine the boy's identity, but none of Amber's classmates knew who it was. After that, the investigators checked the missing person's mobile phone. It turned out that the signal was still being located in the area where the young woman had disappeared. This meant that either she herself or someone else was trying to access it. Nevertheless, they could not determine the exact location and find the phone. Specially trained dogs were used for the search and could pick up a trail. They led the searchers to Escondido High School, then along the highway to the remote Pala Indian Reservation, where the trail broke off. The mother claimed that they had never been in this area, and Amber would not have gone there alone. All of this pointed to unforeseen circumstances. The news about the incident with Amber spread like lightning in the area. This report already appeared in all news broadcasts. This helped to gather many groups of volunteers who came to the police and offered their help. Finally, the FBI got involved. The agents began checking locals with criminal backgrounds. They conducted more than 500 conversations but found no clues. The law enforcement agencies examined the missing person's house again with special means but discovered nothing suspicious. All surveillance cameras along the possible route were also checked. Although she could be seen in some recordings, there was nowhere the moment of disappearance. Time passed, but the investigators had nothing substantial. The search groups also found nothing. From all the collected information, only one name stood out: Dave Cave, the stepfather who had been suspicious from the beginning. The police investigated the family life thoroughly. In general, understanding prevailed there, but the stepfather had some complaints. He thought that Amber should spend more time with the family, although she preferred school, clubs, and seclusion in her room. The main thing that alarmed the police were the confused statements of the stepfather about that day. He unexpectedly did not go to work, went to training instead, returned home, went away again. The stepfather visited his mother and his wife at work, brought her an unusual gift, for the first time in their life together. Moreover, when he returned home, he did not check the answering machine, which was uncharacteristic for him. It seemed as if Dave's thoughts were far away. Even his wife noticed that he behaved unusually that day. The law enforcement agencies investigated the suspected stepfather's past thoroughly, but found no evidence against him. Finally, he was invited to the police station for checks, including a lie detector test. The man agreed. Dave successfully passed 8 polygraph tests. To the investigators' dismay, he mastered all the examinations flawlessly. After that, all suspicions against him were dropped. Months passed, but there was no news about Amber. The woman was tormented by doubts about the possible involvement of her new husband in her daughter's disappearance. Finally, she could no longer bear it, packed her things and the younger daughter Allison and left Dave. She feared for the safety of her second child. The mother took a long vacation and did not let Allison out of her sight. The woman was desperate. She hoped that her daughter was still alive, although the chances were slim. The mother was ready to turn to private investigators, dog handlers, even fortune tellers. She did not hesitate to travel to Mexico with Allison when a witness reported seeing Amber there. In the foreign country, she walked through the streets with flyers, questioned people, and spread information about her missing daughter. Amber's biological father was also consumed by the search. He gave up his job and spent all his savings. This had a strong impact on him, but he did not give up. The story triggered an enormous public response. Articles were written and documentary films were made about Amber's mysterious disappearance. All of America was stirred by this case. On the 13th of February 2010, on the anniversary of Amber's disappearance, her family organized an event at her school. It aimed to raise funds for continuing the search. The police appeared there and publicly admitted that they were not making progress in the investigation. Amber was still considered missing. At this point, only a few still believed in her return. People supported Amber's mother and were outraged that the possible perpetrator could be at large. A few weeks later, on the 25th of February 2010, Chelsea King disappeared in the small town of Poway, 20 minutes drive from Escondido. She had a younger brother named Tyler. That morning, Chelsea went jogging, but did not return by noon. It was as if she had dissolved into thin air. Her relatives could not reach her. They were less concerned about her absence than about the fact that she did not respond to calls and messages, which had never happened before. The family turned to the police, and a large-scale search began. It turned out that Chelsea had gone to Rancho Bernardo Park in San Diego, a popular recreation area. The parents drove there and found her car in the parking lot. The phone was ringing in it, but Chelsea was nowhere to be seen. The area was combed. Many volunteers joined the search. After a few hours, some personal items of the young woman were found in the forest. They lay on a path about 3 kilometers from her car. This aroused disturbing assumptions about a possible assault. Nothing was still known about Amber, but when her parents learned of the new disappearance, they immediately went to the park and offered their help with the search. Amber's relatives sensed a connection between the incidents and wanted to help Chelsea's family. They decided to join forces to find whoever was troubling the local girls. Special search dogs were deployed. The trail ended at Lake Hodges near the park. There they concentrated their efforts. Soon they found more items of the athlete, her top and a running shoe. During the search, the investigators checked the chronology and current reports of missing girls. They knew Amber's case and looked for similar incidents in recent years. It turned out that there was another incident a few months before Chelsea's disappearance. On the 22nd of December 2009, Candace Mona was jogging her usual route. Near the place where Chelsea's things were found, Candace was attacked by an unknown person. He threw her to the ground and tried to hold her. The young woman recognized his intentions and began to defend herself and scream. As if by miracle, she managed to free herself and hit him hard. The perpetrator was distracted by the pain, which gave Candace the chance to escape. She immediately turned to the police and reported the incident. When Chelsea disappeared, Candace's case was still being investigated, but there were no clues. The police re-examined the description of the attacker, a young, light-skinned man with dark hair and strong build. Meanwhile, the results of the analysis of Chelsea's things arrived. 2 DNA profiles were found, one from Chelsea, the other foreign. It was immediately compared with the database and yielded a match. The owner was John Gardner, known for his dangerous behavior. It became clear that he was involved in Chelsea's disappearance, and the investigators began looking for him. There was a possibility that the sought person was in captivity. The suspect lived not far from Bernard's estate. He was arrested on the 28th of February 2010. First, all his possessions and rented objects were checked, but nothing was found. After the arrest, the man demanded a lawyer and refused to speak with the investigators, which made the search for Chelsea more difficult. They began investigating the suspect's past to understand where he might have turned. John Albert Garner was born in 1979 in California. His childhood was difficult. The family moved often. The father abused alcohol and showed aggressive behavior. John's mother reported his psychological problems since childhood. He was treated in a special clinic and took many medications, however, without particular success. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and attention deficit syndrome. His mood was very unstable. In the year 2000, John was arrested for an incident with a young neighbor. He had invited her to watch a movie, but the situation got out of control. The young woman managed to leave the house and call the police. Garner was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. Psychiatrists warned of his potential danger to society, but he was given a chance for rehabilitation after his release. Interestingly, one of the experts insisted on the longest possible prison sentence for this dangerous man: 10 years. However, he was not only released earlier, but even released on parole after only 4 years. After that, he violated the parole conditions several times, but the authorities took no action. John stopped reporting to the police a few months before Amber Dubois' disappearance. The investigators had a victim who could identify the perpetrator. Candy was visiting her parents, so the investigators had to drive to her. They took 6 photos with them, one of John and the others of similar-looking men. The young woman immediately pointed to Gartner. Meanwhile, the suspect denied any involvement in Chelsea's disappearance, but could not explain the presence of his DNA on the evidence. It was difficult to communicate with him. He was silent, screamed or laughed hysterically. Unexpectedly, Gartner asked if they also wanted to accuse him in the Amber Dubois case. Up to this moment, she had not been mentioned. This led to the assumption that the list of his deeds could be more extensive. A check revealed that Gartner had lived near the house of the missing Amber a year before. The investigators did not immediately tell him this, but informed the department that was dealing with this case. 5 days after the search began, Chelsea King was found at Hodges Lake. Evidence was discovered that pointed to John Gartner. After that, the law enforcement officers had valid reasons to accuse Chelsea and Candace of serious offenses. It only remained to prove the involvement in Amber's disappearance. They continued to gather information and put pressure on the alleged perpetrator. John understood that the truth would inevitably come to light, so he decided on his defender's advice to make a deal to ease his fate and reveal Amber's whereabouts. One of his conditions was that the jury would be concealed from the fact that he had revealed this location. The prosecution agreed. On Gartner's instructions, they came to Pala, near Escondido. With bitter irony, this area was located only a few kilometers from the place to which the search dogs had previously led. Near an old water tower, the suspect pointed to a piece of land that they began to dig. The remains found were sent for examination. Amber's identity could be established using dental records. Traces of Amber were found in none of the suspect's cars or houses. Due to the agreement, the prosecution could not reveal that John had indicated this location. Therefore, no charges could be brought against him in Amber's case at this time. Amber's relatives were shattered by this discovery. They had still hoped for her return home. Chelsea's family was also in deep mourning because of the incident with the young woman. Amber's parents were extremely dismayed that the perpetrator would not be punished for the incident with their daughter. However, the investigators could hold him accountable for another act, which was already a success. The prosecution had solid evidence against the suspect in connection with Chelsea's case. The prosecution even expected the highest sentence. Witness statements, DNA analyses, and other evidence practically guaranteed success in court. However, there was the possibility that Amber's case would not be officially closed. Therefore, another deal with the prosecution was proposed. The families of both women agreed to the deal to officially declare him guilty in both cases. In exchange for confessing to the acts against Chelsea, Amber, and the attack on Candace, he was promised to spare his life. John promised to think about this offer. Later, Amber's mother asked for a meeting with Gardner. She was allowed to visit him. In the conversation, he told how he saw the young woman on the way to school and forced her under threats to get into the car. Then he brought her to a secluded place where he did terrible things. After his story, Amber's mother left silently, unable to find words. This meeting gave her an understanding of what had happened and eliminated the suspicions against her second husband. The families could finally say goodbye to their daughters. Amber's mother reconciled with her husband, and they continued to live together, seeking help from family counselors. The man forgave her for past grievances and suspicions. Finally, Gardner agreed to the prosecutor's offer to escape the harshest sentence. In May 2010, he was sentenced to 2 prison terms without parole for the incidents with 2 young women, as well as to 25 years for the attack on Candace. According to Gardner, sometime after the incident with Amber, he tried to inflict irreparable harm on himself. However, this attempt failed. He claimed to have felt strong pangs of conscience for his actions. After that, he developed psychological problems and sought professional help. Gardner reported to the doctors difficulties in controlling his emotions, but told nothing about the incident. He was prescribed treatment. After several years, Amber's mother found the strength to forgive the person who had caused pain to her family. This helped her find inner peace and close this painful chapter of her life. These events triggered a broad public response. As a result, changes were made in legislation regarding persons who had committed crimes of an intimate nature. For the first time, fines were increased. Prison terms were extended, and the requirements for supervision after release were tightened. In addition, the possibilities of early release in such cases were reviewed. This story tells of an unusual couple, the young American Joe and the Russian beauty Olga. Their connection seemed to be the embodiment of the American dream. Beauty, wealth, and love united. Shortly after their wedding, the newlyweds decided to take a romantic trip to the Virgin Islands. But as so often happens, unexpected twists of fate can hide behind external prosperity. The newlyweds had no idea that their untroubled happiness would not last forever. An invisible clock had already begun to tick and measured out 107 days. Exactly that much time was granted to this couple for a carefree existence. In Wilmington, in the state of Delaware, lived the Connell family. The parents had 3 children, the eldest John, the middle Joseph, and the youngest Kelly. The siblings' childhood was loud, with frequent quarrels over trifles. But life brought its corrections. The parents separated, which represented a difficult test for everyone. The children stayed with their mother, who later found a new life partner. He became practically a second father to the children. The family settled in a wealthy neighborhood and had no financial difficulties. As they got older, the children grew closer and found a common language. Joseph, or simply Joe, as his loved ones called him, grew up to be an ambitious young man. In business matters, he showed himself to be pedantic and responsible, but in life, he was the soul of society. Joe knew how to create a cheerful atmosphere and easily found a common language with people. Joseph's professional life was successful. Together with his best friend Christopher, they owned a car repair shop and a business. The partners developed their business with enthusiasm and invested all their strength in it. During this time, Joseph met Olga, a young woman from Russia, through the internet. Both were over 30 and had experiences with failed relationships in the past. Despite the distance, they quickly found a common language thanks to similar characters. Both were lively and friendly personalities who were appreciated by their environment. Joe, who had not previously thought about serious relationships, unexpectedly met a woman who turned his worldview upside down. Their communication became daily. They spent much time online together. The connection between them became so strong that Olga decided to move from Siberia to the USA. At their personal meeting, Joseph was enchanted not only by Olga's external beauty, but also by her gentle character. The feelings proved to be mutual. Olga also found Joseph appealing. They began to meet, and their relationship developed rapidly. The story of Joseph and his chosen one from Russia began like a fairy tale. The Connell family immediately took a liking to the charming young woman. Behind Olga's external fragility was hidden a determined character and extraordinary energy. Joseph's relatives hoped that it would be she who could steer their son's life into calmer channels. The couple in love decided to legalize their relationship, and here the first difficulties began. According to family tradition, the daughter-in-law should receive the mother-in-law's ring. However, the jewelry was already worn by Joseph's sister, Kelly, who had received it for her own wedding a decade earlier. The diamond-set ring was valued at $20,000. Joseph devised a sophisticated plan. He secretly exchanged the gemstones in his sister's ring for zirconia and set the real diamonds in a new setting for Olga. It was planned that after the wedding, everything would return to its place. But Kelly noticed the exchange and expressed her displeasure to her brother. Joseph was disappointed and said his sister was violating family traditions. The wedding took place on the Virgin Islands. Kelly was not present, citing work, but sent Olga some unpleasant messages about the ring. The bride, who knew nothing of the groom's machinations, was saddened by this attitude. From this moment on, the relationship between brother and sister became tense. Shortly after the wedding, unknown persons broke into the newlywed couple's house. Many valuables and family heirlooms disappeared, but the diamond ring remained with Olga. Joseph called the police, but the investigation reached a dead end. No traces were found. If it was not a staging, then it was obviously an experienced criminal. But this incident was only the beginning of serious trials for the couple. Fate held new, even more difficult obstacles in store for them that could change their lives forever. The story of Joseph and Olga Connell began like a fairy tale. They spent their honeymoon on the picturesque Virgin Islands in the Caribbean. The newlywed couple enjoyed each other, the azure blue water and the gentle sun. The days were filled with fishing, yacht trips on the turquoise waves, and trying local delicacies. Their financial situation allowed them not to impose any restrictions on themselves during their honeymoon. After returning home, they acquired a luxurious Mercedes worth over $100,000. The new convertible became a symbol of their success. Joseph, as co-owner of a flourishing automotive company, could afford this. The business brought in about $1 million per year. Olga, a former stockbroker, had deep knowledge in economics, finance, and customer service. She quickly integrated into her husband's business and took on the role of administrator. The attractive Russian blonde with an accent enchanted customers with her friendliness and professionalism, thus contributing to the development of their joint enterprise. It seemed as if nothing could cloud their happiness, but fate had other plans. On the 23rd of September 2013, only 3 months after the wedding, something terrible happened in their house in Wilmington. Around 2 o'clock at night, an alarming call came into the emergency services. A witness reported an incident involving a woman near a condominium in the Paladin Club residential complex. The paramedics arrived at the scene within minutes. They found Olga in critical condition and immediately began providing assistance. Despite all efforts, the young woman unfortunately could not be saved on the way to the hospital. When examining the scene, the investigators also discovered Joseph nearby, who unfortunately was already unconscious and not responding. The circumstances indicated that this was not an accident. The investigators suspected that the couple was on their way home when they were attacked. The detectives connected this incident with a recent break-in at their house that had interrupted the married couple's happy life. The questioning of witnesses and neighbors brought no significant results. Although many had heard loud noises, no one had seen the incident itself. Some reported 2 loud male voices arguing shortly before the incident. It was assumed that a conflict with a tragic outcome had taken place between unknown persons and the couple. This coincided in time with Joseph and Olga's return from a bar where they had celebrated Olga's 39th birthday. At the celebration, the newlywed couple, their friends, and some of Joe's family members had gathered. They amused themselves and danced late into the night before setting off for home, not suspecting what misfortune awaited them. They drove in their convertible to their condominium, parked at the roadside, and walked to the entrance. The couple seemed carefree and cheerful, unaware of the impending unpleasantness. The man was found motionless in the bushes beside the path, while his wife was still fighting and waiting for help. The investigators who arrived and provided her with first aid understood that she was the only witness to the incident. They tried to obtain at least some information about the perpetrators from the victim by asking questions. but the woman did not respond. Nearby, the police discovered numerous metal objects, which led them to conclude that several criminals might have been involved. The evidence found indicated the use of different types of instruments. It is logical to assume that a single person would hardly use several types of weapons. The investigators almost immediately dismissed the theory of a material motive. Nothing was stolen from the victims. They found a wallet with a large sum of cash on them. Beside the woman lay a bag with a phone and valuables, and on her finger was an expensive wedding ring worth several tens of thousands of dollars. When analyzing the situation, the investigators concluded that this was a planned action against the married couple. The newlyweds were presumably awaited near their apartment, and the perpetrators acted with the obvious intention of causing serious harm. At first glance, they seemed to be an amiable, happy couple who had no enemies. But what then could have been the reason for such a terrible incident? When the investigations began, the investigators first turned to the relatives of those affected. They spoke with Joe's mother and his stepfather. These assured that the couple had no enemies who would be capable of such an act. At least they had heard nothing of it. The couple had never complained about problems with anyone. As already mentioned, however, all relatives knew about the disagreement between Joseph and his sister because of the ring, and this information naturally came up during the questioning. Some suspected that Kelly could be involved in the incident because of the jewelry. Could the sister have been so offended that she took such a serious step out of revenge? However, the ring remained at the crime scene, which did not fit this theory. Strange, however, was that Kelly, Joe's sister, was one of the first at the crime scene, although she lived in another part of the city. She seemed confused about what had happened. The sister worked actively with the investigators and tried to help. She reported openly about the recent problems with her brother, without hiding anything. Kelly even showed the chat history with sharp messages between them and Olga. From the messages, it emerged that Joe's wife suspected his sister of the disappearance of the valuables, but she denied her involvement and insisted on her innocence regarding the incident. It seemed as if Kelly did not particularly care about an alibi, but at this point it was already known that the perpetrator was a man and had an accomplice. The investigators also learned that Kelly had long fought against a serious illness and had recently undergone difficult treatment, from which she was still recovering. It seemed as if the woman physically did not have the strength for such an act. Nevertheless, the police officers still considered the possibility of her involvement in the incident, although the facts spoke against it. In none of the interrogations did they succeed in convicting her. Nevertheless, she remained in the focus of the investigations for a long time due to the obvious motive: greed. In this phase, the investigators also examined another theory: jealousy. Possibly someone from Olga's or Joseph's past was against their relationship and wanted to separate the couple or take revenge for a broken heart. The investigations continued, and the investigators decided to check the couple's former relationships. However, this trail quickly led to a dead end. Olga had no close acquaintances in the USA except Joe. It was unlikely that someone would have crossed the ocean because of old feelings. Joe also maintained good relationships with his former girlfriends who had already started their own families and were not interested in his life. The case proved to be more complicated than originally assumed. The investigators searched for other clues and tried to find enemies of the couple, but both spouses were pleasant people who avoided conflicts. Special attention was drawn to a ring that was the reason for disagreements between Joe and his sister. The investigators suspected that this could be an important factor in the case. They spoke with Joseph's brother-in-law, Garrett. Suspicion arose that he might have acted at Kelly's request because of the dispute over the ring. However, Garrett had a watertight alibi and confirmed his wife's statement that she was resting at home after medical treatment on the day of the incident. Just then, Garrett expressed the thought about a possible connection of what had happened with illegal activities. He doubted the honesty of Joseph's income and suspected his involvement in questionable businesses. This version found confirmation. It turned out that Joseph sold prohibited preparations underground, and achieved considerable income in doing so. Some acquaintances suspected involvement of Joe's business partner, Chris Rivers, in the incident. According to a close friend, Chris often expressed himself negatively about Joe and even once accused him of misappropriation of funds. The reason for the conflict was that Joe sold prohibited preparations through their common shop, but did not share the income with Chris, who had financial difficulties. The investigators went to Chris, who had been Joe's partner for over 10 years. They had built the business from the ground up together and overcome many difficulties. But instead of a grieving friend, the police saw a cheerful person, which seemed strange to them. Chris shared that he had planned to meet with the couple in a bar that night, but had been delayed because of business. Chris shared information that many rumors circulated around Olga, including alleged connections to certain circles from Russia. This could explain the quite high income level of the family. Chris pointed to possible dishonesty by Joe and provided the investigators with several potential directions for the investigation. Despite doubts about Chris's sincerity, all this information required thorough verification. In the course of the investigations, a certain connection of Joseph's to the shadow side of society was uncovered, which several of his acquaintances confirmed. A couple of years before his marriage, Joe ended up behind bars because of the accusation of illegal possession of a weapon system. The incident occurred near a bar. An argument broke out, and Joseph took an object for self-defense from his pickup to intimidate the participants in the conflict. He did not make it to the bar, as the arriving police officers arrested him in the parking lot. As a result, he was convicted, and in custody the man made new acquaintances, befriending people who told him about steroid trafficking. After his release, Joe did not forget his new friends and began to participate in the illegal business of selling sports preparations. Besides his main business, he became a quite well-known figure in this area. However, it remained unclear whether this could be the reason for what had happened, whether Joseph could have gotten in someone's way in this shadow business, and whether actually the suspected Russian criminal elements who divided up the business in America could be involved in this matter. All this the investigators had to find out. In searching for possible organizers or accomplices of this dark business, the investigators came across a man named Harry Cook. He worked in this city and strived to become Joe's partner in the car business. At the time of the incident with the Connells, he had invested more than $100,000 in this business, which could also be a motive for unwanted actions. In addition, Harry lived near the Connells, but had a reliable alibi for the period of the tragic incident, which is why the investigations reached a dead end. In continued communication with business partner Chris Rivers, the investigators learned an interesting detail. The partner repeatedly pointed to suspicious moments regarding his friend's dishonesty. The investigators checked the accounting documents of the business and found that it actually suffered considerable losses, despite high income. Ultimately, the business did not remain in the red, but expenses grew exponentially. This looked very suspicious. The money seemed to disappear. It became obvious that someone was conducting financial machinations here, but in the course of the investigations, it turned out that Chris himself was responsible for this. In investigating financial discrepancies, the investigators made an unexpected discovery. The business partner had a serious addiction to strong substances. Chris spent enormous sums on his harmful passion, and his own means were no longer sufficient. It turned out that he embezzled funds from the business while betraying his best friend. This information led the investigations to a new main suspect with a possible serious motive. It became known that Chris had completely lost control over his addiction. He consumed large quantities and seemed ready for anything to get the next dose. The partner was sunk in debt and appropriated money wherever he could. Lately, paranoid attacks had increased with him. He said that he was being followed and that people wanted to harm him. Interestingly, it was precisely Chris's attempts to cover up traces that drew police attention to him. He was first arrested for possession of steroids when he tried to shift the blame onto his partner by claiming secret trading through their business. The substances were found in their common auto repair shop. Chris claimed his friend had operated this business alone, without sharing the income. However, it turned out that Chris himself sold the steroids to settle his considerable debts. He was accused of having set up a warehouse in the auto repair shop. The suspect admitted that he had started this business himself out of desperation, and Joe knew nothing about it. After that, Chris was arrested 2 more times. In this phase, the police officers became suspicious because of his alibi. He willingly provided recordings from surveillance cameras from his house that confirmed his presence there. An examination revealed that the time on the recordings had not been manipulated, but the investigators still had doubts. When examining Chris's phone, they found that he had made phone calls much more frequently than usual on the evening of the incident. Most of the calls fell exactly during the time of the alleged incident. Although the call log had been deleted, the specialists could easily restore it. Shortly before the incident, the business partner and his companion Chris River had contact with a certain Josh Bay. It turned out that Josh was a customer who bought illegal steroids from Chris. Furthermore, he had disappeared without paying for the last delivery of the substances. During the course of the investigation, it turned out that Josh Bay, although he was not the immediate perpetrator, was possibly involved in the incident. On the night of the incident, he called his acquaintances Dominic and Aaron several times. It is suspected that these two might have been involved in the case. A picture emerged in which the business partner of the affected person, who had high debts and personal dislike, might have been involved in the incident. Possibly he had recruited his supplier for illegal substances, Josh Bay, to organize a risky operation. Bay in turn might have hired 2 of his acquaintances. The situation became increasingly confusing. If successful, the business partner could count on a payout of $1 million from Joe's life insurance. Such policies had been taken out for both partners at the beginning of their cooperation. In case of his partner's disappearance, Chris could have received a considerable sum that would have been sufficient to solve his financial problems. After Joe's marriage, however, he could no longer claim the payout. Now the entire insurance sum would be due to Olga, leaving Chris empty-handed. Consequently, Chris Rivers had to eliminate both spouses, his successful friend and his new wife, to gain sole access to the money. This theory was indirectly supported by strange correspondence between the alleged organizer and the accomplices on the night of the incident. Joe's partner constantly inquired with Bay about his whereabouts and the time of his return home. His messages revealed concern about the course of the planned actions. The responses were equally ambiguous. The investigators confiscated 4 mobile phones from all suspects who were connected to the incident. The analysis of mobile device movements based on cell tower data revealed that the suspects were near the crime scene on the 23rd of September 2013. The investigation took an unexpected turn. Dominic and Aaron, the immediate perpetrators, were discovered near the Connell residence. Bay, who coordinated the operation, was in constant contact with Chris, the client, who was at a different location. The surveillance camera footage, which the main suspect relied on to confirm his alibi, played an unexpected role. It showed the strange behavior of the business partner. He walked nervously around the apartment without putting down his phone. Obviously, at that moment, he was waiting for a response from the contractor and conducting negotiations with him. These assumptions soon found confirmation. Particularly valuable information was provided by Josh Bay himself when he turned himself into the authorities during questioning and agreed to cooperate with the investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. According to Bay, Chris actually commissioned him to eliminate his business partner from the car dealership and his wife. As payment, he handed over a down payment of $5,000 and promised to pay an additional $60,000 after completing the assignment. As part of an agreement with the investigators, Bay agreed to testify against Chris in court. 1 year after the incident, Chris Rivers was charged with conspiracy. The other participants in the case also had to answer in court. The hearings began 19 months after the start of the investigation. Chris's plan, although carefully thought out, did not work out. He hoped to confuse the investigation by laying several false trails. These included possible involvement of the victim in illegal steroid sales systems, connections to his past, recent unlawful appropriations of valuables, as well as a conflict with the sister. All of this could have led the investigators away from the right path and to false conclusions. Fortunately, the law enforcement agencies did not fall for these deception maneuvers and were able to pick up the trail of the true perpetrators. The investigators determined that the alleged unauthorized break-in for the purpose of stealing valuables in the victim's house was actually staged. Bay carried out this operation on Chris's instructions. He broke into the Connells' house to find and take the diamond wedding ring. The plan was that the law enforcement agencies would immediately suspect Kelly's sister of the subsequent tragic events. However, the plan failed because the piece of jewelry was not among the couple's belongings. The court proceedings against the participants in the incident were conducted separately. Aaron Thompson confessed his guilt and received 2 life sentences for his participation in the incident with the Connells, plus 45 years when it was proven that he held the murder weapon. Chris Rivers was sentenced as the organizer to 2 life sentences and an additional 50 years. Dominic Benton was acquitted of the main charge because he did not use violence against the couple. Nevertheless, he was sentenced to 5 years for participation in the conspiracy and aiding and abetting. Josh Bay received only 5 years for his active cooperation with the investigators. In this situation, Joseph Kelly's sister found herself in a difficult position. For a time, the investigators put pressure on her and tried to accuse her of participation in the incident with her brother. The innocent woman almost would have been deprived of her freedom. However, she could not have been involved in it. Undoubtedly, she had been saddened by her mother's and her brother's behavior with the ring, but it merely led to hurt feelings and verbal confrontations. At the farewell ceremony, the sister confessed that she had loved her brother very much and mourned deeply together with all the relatives. She shares the common grief over the heavy loss.